Welcome and good morning or evening or afternoon, wherever you are located, to our guests, students, faculty, alumni, colleagues, and friends. My name is Giovanni Santamaria. I'm the chair of the School of Architecture and Design at New York Tech, and I'm pleased to welcome all of you to this evening on behalf of our Dean, Maria Perbellini. New York Institute of Technology School of Architecture and Design is also participating through multiple venues to the 17th International Architecture Exhibition, Venice Biennial 2021. Some of the work of our students and faculty is also exhibited in the Italian pavilion titled Resilient Communities, curated by Alessandro Melis in the section Architecture as Caregiver, curated by our Dean Perbellini. Today's event is also part of the virtual Italian pavilion CTX Venice, curated by Tom Kovac and Alessandro Melis, with the creative director, Maria Perbellini. The theme of our lecture series is Correlated Crisis. 2020, as we know, marked a critical year in which environmental, health, economic, and social crises had become correlated, bringing forth the emergence of unforeseen global issues to be addressed with urgency. The summer and fall 2021 lecture and event series at the School of Architecture and Design at New York Tech creates opportunity to discuss how architecture, design, and urbanism can disclose implicit parameters and activate structural transformation in our ecological, social, and built environments. From how our reality is measured and validated to automation and computational thinking, the series aims to question possibilities for disciplinary actions. Welcome again to all of you, and thanks for joining us. And now I leave the stage to Pablo Lorenzo, our associate professor at the School of Architecture and Design at New York Tech.
Thank you, Giovanni. Thank you all for joining us, and welcome to our lecture series. My name is Pablo Lorenzo Iroa. I'm an associate professor at the New York Institute of Technology School of Architecture and Design. The title of today's event is Digital Feudalism and Surveillance Capitalism, Virtual and Political Urban Borders. It's co-organized with my colleague, Assistant Professor Dong-Sei Kim, in consultation with the Lectures and Events Committee, now chaired by Alessandro Melis. Borders and cities index more of an economic system than the previous modern ideas of social, economic stability, health, and equity, which define the form and structure of the city. These economic systems are measurable in how the city form of finance, quoting Willis 1995, rather than social, environmental, urban, and architectural parameters. What are the consequences of capitalism in architecture and urbanism? How can we denaturalize cities as businesses and present alternative scenarios? In a globalized world economy, people cannot move across borders, but goods can. How can we disclose implicit and explicit political boundaries in the current neoliberal model? What are the possibilities for a post-capitalist urbanism in the Post-Anthropocene? How is technology enabling or resisting these processes? How is the current feudal capitalism in computation reinforcing or displacing this logic in physical and political borders? Today, we will aim at raising the relevant questions that structure reality and define what is possible. Now I would like to give the word to my colleague Dong-Sei Kim, with whom we organize this event, and who will do a brief introduction and pleased to introduce this evening panelists. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the introduction. Good evening, I'm Dong-Sei Kim, an assistant professor of architecture at the School of Architecture and Design here at NYIT. It's a pleasure to have distinguished guests here today, and I really look forward to the discussion. This event is organized and moderated by myself and associate professor and director of the Architecture and Computational Technologies program, Pablo Lorenzo Iroa. The panelist that we have here is Sean Anderson, who is the undergraduate program director and associate professor at Cornell University. Hana Leo, who is a thinker and activist and artist. And then M7 Red, Pio Toruta, and Mauricio Corbalan. And Julika Arib, who is a PhD candidate at the Princeton University. And I would like to introduce Sean Anderson, who is our first presenter. Sean Anderson is not only a prolific writer and also a friend of mine, who has recently been appointed to the undergraduate program director at Cornell. So he, in the past, in October 2016, at the Museum of Modern Art, opened the exhibition Insecurities, Tracing Displacement and Shelter, dedicated in part to the approximately 60 million individuals who are at the time forcibly displaced from their homelands. The exhibition brought together works of architecture, art, and design to reimagine the world as a space of transit, of permanent impermanence. Since then, the number of displaced persons due to multiple global emergencies have grown to more than 82 million. And in this talk, former MoMA curator Sean Anderson will examine how this exhibition amplified the ways in which architects and designers may approach a present and future of unfolding humanitarian disasters and communities' engagement at all scales. The talk is titled Insecurities, and I will briefly introduce Sean Anderson. He has a long list of achievements. Sean is currently the associate professor and director of the BArch program, the undergraduate program at Cornell University, College of Art, Architecture, Art, and Planning. Previously, he was an associate curator in the Department of Architecture and Design at the Museum of Modern Art, MoMA, and as a fellow of the American Academy in Rome with a PhD in African art history, Sean has practiced as an architect and taught in Afghanistan, Australia, India, Italy, Morocco, Sri Lanka, and the UAE. He has authored books on South Asian ritual sculpture, the modern architecture of colonial Eritrea, and co-edited a volume dedicated to contemporary architecture and design in Sri Lanka. In 2020, he co-curated the exhibition on Muzharul Islam, Surfacing Intention at Dhaka Art Summit in Dhaka, Bangladesh. And at MoMA, he also organized exhibitions that we'll be more learning about: Insecurities, Tracing, Displacement, and Shelter. He also curated Thinking Machines, Art Design in the Computer Age from 1959 to 89, and 4 iterations of the Young Architects Program at MoMA PS1. And he was also responsible for and have collaborated on permanent collections, galleries, including the ongoing Building Citizens 2019 Surrounds. He co-organized with Mabel Wilson, Reconstructions, Architecture and Blackness in America, the first exhibition ever at MoMA to highlight the work of African-American and African diasporic architects, which was one of the most recent ones. So thank you very much for listening to my introduction, and I will hand it over to Sean. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dongse Kapsamida. That's very generous of you, very kind. And I wanted to thank and acknowledge the New York Institute of Technology and Pablo and Dongse and all who invited me to join you this evening to reflect on an exhibition that happened to be my first exhibition at the Museum of Modern Art, about which I will discuss and refer to this evening, among other broader questions that I feel that interface or have friction with perhaps the theme and questions of tonight's panel. I will now share my screen. Apologies if this doesn't work immediately. Here we are. And So, Pablo, Dongse, okay?
Yes, great, thank you.
And I have to just say, I forgot to mention, I just returned from Venezia, and tanti complimenti on the Pedidione. It was fantastic. I spent, I think, probably an hour just in Italia. So congratulations to all of you on that really important set of works. So tonight I begin with an image, a detail image, about which I will talk about a little bit further down the road. A detail of a work installed in our exhibition by the Indian artist Reena Saini Kalat. This is an installation that was called Woven Chronicle. And this work begins to examine, if not look at, the ways in which border systems have been created, have been inscribed, have been re-inscribed, and transit the world in so many different ways, including the instantiation and building of border systems. But I wanted to step back for a moment and also talk about the origins of this exhibition prior to my arrival in the museum, which was I was the undergraduate director at the University of Sydney in Australia, at a moment in which the Australian government was spending over $1 billion Australian dollars a year to maintain its offshore immigration detention program. And images like this were quite common, not only in the newspapers, but in video media. And what struck me quite particularly were not only the images of power and of the invisible border systems that were at play in such photographs and such videos, but also the potential that it could lead to death. Now, of course, at the same time, the international global refugee crisis was unfolding. And I began to undertake a series of projects, both written and research projects, as well as documentary, on the offshore islands upon which the Australian government had built or had leased centers that would become home to thousands of men, women, and children who had been, in fact, pushed away, as the term goes, or pushed off from the invisible international maritime borders that surrounded the continent of Australia in images like this. So when we see this one Australian destroyer intercepting the boat, in this case of primarily Afghani refugees in the ocean, they are actually participating in a decades-long program of excision. And this was an act of parliament, of Australian parliament, in which the borders that surrounded the continent of Australia, so invisible once again, had been excised from the continent itself, meaning that the government didn't have to follow the 1951 Geneva Conventions as it pertains to the treatment of refugees, and therefore, all of these individuals were taken by boat off their own boat into detention centers, and more often than not sent to one of three islands that were the primary home of, or still are actually, the primary homes for these detention centers. Those include Christmas Island in the far west of the continent, and Manus Island in Papua New Guinea, which I will show you in a moment, and also the Kingdom of Nauru, which is the smallest, but perhaps one of the wealthiest countries on the planet per capita. So because I am an American citizen and not an Australian citizen, I gained access to these facilities. I was able to come to the island as a quote unquote tourist and actually be able to see them using both secret cameras as well as my own camera to see the facilities. And this is just one of many gates around Manus Island. detention center. At the time that I visited, there were over 900 men, exclusively men, in this facility. 3 men had been killed by that point, either by disease or by actual violence that was happening in the center. And you can see the statistics there on the bottom left of the screen of the amount of money that is still being paid in order to maintain these very, very substandard prison camps, as it were, in this case, on Manus Island. And here is the closest one could get to in Nauru. Nauru is about a 2-mile long island. It's dotted by a coral reef, and it has a very inhospitable center in which this camp has been located. And at the time that I was in Sydney, around 2013, 2014, on average, the Australian government was spending 684.4 million AUD per year for housing around 900 men, women, and children. Again, an incredibly violent space in which wild dogs had been known to attack and maul children, women were being raped, and so forth. So incredibly horrific spaces, and to my eye, also incredibly horrific. But why I show you these is that I became very interested in the notion that displacement unto itself was not just about the housing or the relocation of displaced individuals, but established and began a set of questions around borders themselves, global borders, the instantiation and, in fact, design of borders to keep people in as much as to keep people out. And I wanted to just acknowledge that historically, one of the primary questions around borders is that of identification. That when one crosses a border, a national border, or even today, a digital border, one's identification comes into question, one's visibility comes into question, if not reinscribed in new ways. I found this image from Port Said in Egypt around 1915, which is a group of 4,000 or so Armenian children, according to the caption there, that had been displaced in World War I. And they were subsequently put on a boat and dropped off, as it were, in Port Said. The problem is that many of these children didn't know their name, they didn't know where they were from, they didn't know their origins. And so the process of repatriation or of acknowledging the refugee was fundamentally questioned through the process of identification. This identification and its problem has led even to this day, in this case, Rohingya refugees from Myanmar, now in Bangladesh, have faced similar struggles because of the use of blockchain technologies to now create identification tags for all of the individuals in the border towns surrounding the Myanmar border. And what has actually been incited is not only racial and ethnic strife around the presencing of Rohingya refugees, but now backlash because the Myanmar government, both historically and presently, does not recognize the Rohingya at all, and therefore they are stateless. So stateless individuals becoming identified through technology today also creates new problems around who and what actually can identify you. So in that regard, and speaking to an audience perhaps mainly of architecture students, I wanted to think about what a border might look like. For us in the exhibition, we were very much interested in the line, the violent line that is both drawn on a map, usually by white men, in order to incite an inside and an outside, a dialectics, if you will, of otherness. We could look at the Ceuta border wall between Morocco and Spain, in this case. We could also look at the artworks, in this case, a 35mm film by Lonnie van Brummelen, who began to document what border systems looked like spatially along Europe's edges and boundaries, if you will. And so here are storage facilities on the border, I believe, in Greece. Or we could look to even more recent phenomena, such as the building of the Mexico-USA border wall, which is unfinished, as we all know, but that companies are being conscripted into not only the design and manufacture of products to build these walls, but fundamentally also are designing them to keep people out. So once one crosses a border as a refugee or as an asylum seeker, the containment of them often lands to the hands of United Nations through the UNHCR, in which case refugee camps that are dotting all over the world now house, as Dongse mentioned, around 83.4 million individuals around the world. These are displaced individuals who are seeking shelter, who are seeking a homeland, but have been forcibly displaced into spaces like Azraq camp in Jordan. And here is Azraq under construction in 2014. Here is Al-Zatari. I'm showing you details rather than the overview of these two camps because we see them quite often. I found this one in particular to be fascinating because I met the refugee who painted it, and he was painting from memory what his town looked like on the back of his metal shipping container shelter. So too, though, with the question of identification, in Turkey in particular, at the stage that we were building the exhibition, we were looking at the ways in which countries and questions around sovereignty came into question with camps like Nizip, a container camp that at the time was considered the most, quote, technologically advanced refugee camp because it used biometric data to monitor and map every single individual that came into that camp. Nizip number 2, there are 2 camps, are now being merged into one massive camp, Suruç, which was starting to be built in 2014 as well. Suruç is to hold around 35,000 individuals and will use the same technologies to monitor and map, if you will, all of the individuals that will come to reside here. All of this is to say that the camp in and of itself is a fragile space. It's a space of multiple precarities, not only for those individuals that are trying to seek shelter, but the shelters themselves that are being arrayed, as you saw, in Turkey and in Ethiopia and Kenya and throughout the world, that the precarity of these camps is that they are being demolished, they're made to disappear, and with that, the individuals that are also forced to disappear with them. Like this image from the so-called jungle camp in Calais, France from 2016. And so I wanted to just share images from the exhibition, which took around 7 or 8 months, so a very short turnaround period to not only learn a museum's policies and procedures, but also to put together an exhibition of this nature. And you see 3 or 4 works here. I won't go into the details of all of them, but our department acquired what's called the Better Shelter. You see on the left, which was a new camp typology manufactured using IKEA flat pack technology with a company in Denmark and Sweden called Better Shelter. In the back of the image, in the rear of the image is a work by Xavier. I'm going to have to, Xavier, oh, I have forgotten her last name. My apologies. In the foreground then is a work by forensic oceanography, the no boat or the left to die boat case. Xavier's name is going to come back to me, I'm sure, in a moment. My apologies. Another view and another part of the gallery, we had a collection like Xavier's work, was to look at a grid, if you will, of both shelters that had been proposed as well as built, for better or for worse, and that there is an economic strategy for the most part around them, that companies at the time were being deployed to design better refugee camps, whatever that might mean. They were asked to design better tents, better structures that would allow for perhaps potentially better security of the individuals within them. And this was an interactive installation called Refugee Republic, in which you could, as a visitor, walk through a camp in northern Iraq and open doors to see and to reveal the life of the individuals within them. So you could hear, you could see, and you could experience life, as it were, in that particular camp. In the back is Rina Kalat's work, which I will mention in a moment. And on the right is Tiffany Chung's work on Syria. So in Rina Kalat's map that is site-specific and built onto the wall, she's using electrical wire, telephone wire, to create networks of communication across the map itself. And so there was a sound component, or is a sound component to this work, that's the sound of boats, of birds, of landscapes in which refugees and displacement is taking place. And that became very much the both visual, spatial, and audible backdrop to the entire exhibition. And so with that, I wanted to close just with a set of questions around the building and design of borders that, as we all know, continue to happen, and that the notion of the border is both historical as well as future. How do we begin to rethink what a border might be? How does it begin to appear to us? How do we react to or cross or transgress these borders that ultimately inflict various degrees of invisibility? And so where does a border like this one in Melilla in Spain begin to interact with those individuals playing golf right next door to the border? How do we see, or who do we see at the border? And lastly, that the border also creates fundamental questions around the preciousness and quote unquote value of the refugee, of the individual life. And in this work by United Against Racism, it's an ongoing spreadsheet of all the individuals that perish while in transit. And at the time that our exhibition opened, there were around 44,265 individuals listed on the spreadsheet, and you could read the narrative about not only where they were imagined to come from, but where they in fact had died. And with that, I would like to close and just say that this work is ongoing, and I don't think we are going to ever see the end of these transits of millions of individuals trying to seek home. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Sean, for your strong presentation and also for your work, which I think is pretty impressive and is so important to have people know more about these issues. I also appreciate the relation between the virtual and the physical, which is something that is not being disclosed so much. Now we're going to have our next speaker, Hana Leo, who's a PhD, a thinker, activist, and an artist. Hana is actually a friend of mine. We taught together at the Cooper Union several years ago, and I'm very happy to have the possibility to invite Hana to lecture in this event, because Hana has a quite impressive history of activism in relationship to her own art, her body, and the spaces that she inhabits. So I'm very happy that Hana, we were able to coordinate to have you present. I'm going to just go quickly through the material that you share with us in relationship to your lecture and the bios. Hana is going to speak about the family reappropriation of housing in New York City. On January 13, 2015, the de Blasio administration ordered the Economic Development Corporation to choose HR and A on a sole source basis. Former employees of HR&A advisors occupy and have occupied the most important positions in urban city planning and housing in the city of New York. On October 2, 2019, Hana Leo hangs banners in 19 Kingsland Avenue, Brooklyn, and she sits down with a picture with her residents, for a picture with her residents. She does not revert the deeds transfer under the TPT, third-party transfer. The grab, appropriating private homes, HDFC COPs, double talk, the myth of helping affordable housing and its underlying political agenda, the creation of 200,000 affordable units, foxes in the hen house, how support services for both subsidized housings and buildings that have been arranged with the city have turned predatory. The highest bidder selling social housing to developers, such as in Staten Island, illusion versus truth, the promise of new affordable housing in new developments is, in reality, a reduction of rent stabilized units. Born in Madrid and based in New York City, Hana Leo is a philosopher who works on conceptual art and architecture. Leo holds a PhD and a BA in philosophy, 2004-1992, both from the Universidad Autónoma de Madrid, as well as a master in architecture from the School of Architecture at Princeton University in the United States in the year 2000. Leo started in 2007 in New York, Civic Gaps, an initiative to detect system failures in everyday life of the city. And in Madrid in 2018, the Moises Foundation, Models and Systems, Art and City Initiative to rethink the intangible aspects of the city. And you can visit the website fundacionmosis.com, Civic Gaps, to find more information about it. Leo is the author of the book Rape New York, published by Feminist Press in the United States, Book Works in London, and Lince in Barcelona. As an artist, Leo is well known for her photographic works and installations that have shown in museums such as the MN Cars in Madrid, as well as in other museums worldwide. Thank you, Hana, for joining us. And now I give you the floor so you can make your presentation.
Thank you, Pablo, for inviting me over here. I'm so happy. And thank you to the Institute of Technology. So I'm not so awake as I used to be. I'm going to try to do my best. I'm going to share the screen now. Okay. So what I'm going to try to do now is to tell you a little bit of my answer to one very simple question. The very simple question is why there is no affordable housing in New York, or why the affordable housing in New York is not quite working, and why there is no public space in New York. So we all know that the quality of life in New York is really bad. So I'm just going to show all the layers of why this is happening from my point of view. I'm going to do this with in two ways. One, telling you a series of documentation and information, and another just giving you a clear example. So I'm going to start by this star. Okay, today is a kind of good day to do this and a bad day, because this is basically, I have been doing an analysis of de Blasio administration, and de Blasio is not longer in office, thanks God. But we don't know whether this system is going to continue or not, because the family is still there, right? So basically, this star is the family. The family is the government. The government meaning the mayor, the administration, HPD, that is Housing Preservation and Development, and the government had advisors. Happened to be that in the Blasio administration, there is only one advisor for policy in real estate, in furniture, in city, all city planning is run by HR&A. Okay, this is shocking. This is extraordinary from the Blasio administration. HR&A are a group of people. They were real estate developers. They changed their skin, and they convert themselves into policymakers. They say that they are going to change the way we live, and they are going to make our community better. Okay, we will see a few examples of how they describe themselves. So we have the government. The government made policies. HR&A is advising then what policies to make. In the other side, we have the developers. Some of HR&A are also developers, so we have half and half, right? Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. The developers, we all know what they are. They don't hide themselves, but some of them, they pass themselves as HR&A. The very shocking thing of what I discovered is that basically everybody is going in and out. HR&A people go and they became deputy mayor, they became HPD commissioner. Sometimes they do it directly, but sometimes they do it indirectly, like the case of Maria Torres Springer, that was the wife of Jamie Torres Springer, that is a senior at HR&A. I was studying HDFC's co-op and dealing with legislation changing, and I saw that they changed the HPD commissioner, and I said to myself, oh, wait a minute, let's track this person. How is an HPD commissioner choose? And then was very shocking to see that this person, Maria Torres Springer, only worked as an intern. And after working as an intern for 3 months, then start having a few jobs, all appointed by the mayor. And in 4 years, she was HPD commissioner. It's like, wow. It's like, I mean, she must be brilliant, right? Well, she's not brilliant. She wasn't brilliant. She was married to Jaime Torres Springer. Okay. So this is basically the documentation and the information that you can see. If you go to Civil Gaps, you will see something called the family. And I was reading this article, and it say, in a phone interview Monday, Alicia Glenn said she opted to elevate her aides rather than conduct a broader search for Ben's replacement because of uncertainty facing the city housing plan under the incoming Trump administration. You always want to look at the family first. And if there is great people in the family, and people like James, who demonstrated his ability to step up, you want to reward these people, she say. Here we go. It's like, I'm just shocked. I'm just shocked that this can be possible, right? So I'm not going to read the whole forensic information. There is a search of 3 years that show connections between everybody in the government and in HR&A or Goldman and Sachs. Basically, there is 2 businesses that they are running New York. It's not the Blasio administration, it's not the mayor running New York. So if you go to Civil Gap and look for the family or the appropriation of New York, you will find this. Okay, you will find this. This is the article with the family. You don't have everything there, but you can see the positions, and then it gives you enough information to trace what is going on. So it's basically people. We have Sola Olataye. This search was done between 2014 and 2017. These people is not anymore there. Sola Olataye was running Nietzsche. We know how scandalous was Nietzsche, right? So what I'm doing here is we had Anthony Soris, we had Alicia Glenn also, but what I'm doing here is just it was very, very simple. You know, look at the names in the companies, look at the names in the administration, and trace these people for 10 years, and they were going in and out. And saying, okay, well, why are they going in and out? Well, every time they are in, they change policies, and these policies are helping the developers. For instance, the zoning laws change, and when things are rezoning, then the developers, you know, go and buy. So that happened with the High Line. We all know the High Line. The director of the HR&A is basically the guy running the friends of the High Line. So you will be able to trace and read that later on. I'm not going to do that with you, but basically, you know, this is an investigation of what was behind HPD, and we have her with no curriculum at all, but being an intern on the High Line, and she met the husband there. And then 4 years later, she's the HPD commissioner. Well, why this is important? Well, this is important because the libraries in New York are closed now, a lot of them, because they are converted into luxury housing. And Jaime Torres Springer, that is really smiling all the time. I happened to meet him. I write him a letter and say, you know, I study architecture at Princeton and he may need me. And I talked to him, and yes, I wanted to kind of spy on him and wanted to know exactly what he was doing and why he was doing that. And he basically was very cynical about it, but you know, he say, you really want to change New York the way we want it? We want to increase quality of life. His understanding of quality of life. So we really had to start by the bottom. I start by the bottom mean we really had to take the houses away from those people that, you know, they are immigrants. They came here, they came to New York, they buy land. They don't even know what to do with the houses. They really live in a bad way. But these houses are really valuable. And, you know, we can really steal it. We have a plan. And we are really making New York better. We are creating 200,000 affordable units. I mean, of course, he didn't talk to me that way, but basically that was he was saying. So de Blasio administration promised 200,000 affordable units of housing. And part of then the strategy was to steal this housing from co-ops, from people that bought their houses when they were worth nothing in Brooklyn, in the Bronx, and in Harlem, and then make these people tenants, and then unable to pay the rent, and then put new white New Yorkers that they are clean and good looking into these houses. So basically, he was not making any housing. He was just taking away these houses from the people and giving it to other people, right? So that was his plan. But Jaime Torres Springer is well known. He had a nickname. The library is Shrinker. He had been converting libraries into luxury condos. There is a library in Brooklyn that is right now under construction. The library from is becoming 500 square foot or something like that, ridiculous. And it was like 3,000 square foot library. So this is basically one of the operation. And here we have Carl Westbrod. He was the chairman of New York City Department of City Planning, and he is the guy behind the remodelation of Times Square. This is Sola Olatoye. So basically, he has been tracing these people, and the trace is as simple. I really encourage everybody looking at this now to go ahead and do it. You can go in LinkedIn and Facebook, and you can trace what is the curriculum, why we are not, we don't have enough work, and they are working more than us, but they had no curriculum. Okay, so we need to know that. If you look at the other article, this is the only part that is published. It's basically the reappropriation of housing in New York City. There is another article that is the reappropriation of public space. In the appropriation of housing, what is very interesting is, just going to talk today about this one. It's called the grab. And this is exactly a little bit of what I say. It's basically grabbing from people that is uneducated and immigrants and giving it to other people for a price, right? So I'm going to show you how the scheme works. But before we go to do that, I'm going to show you the other elements. We all know the government, the developers, we know the advisors. Now we have the think tanks and we have the non-for-profits. The think tanks, for instance, Design Trust for Public Space, or Urban Policy, Institute for Urban Policy. So the think tanks have a clear mission. They had to clean their image. They had to give the image that they are doing good, that they are doing something good for the community. So basically, the rule is very simple. You do the absolutely opposite of what you say. If you are really shrinking libraries, if you are stealing public space, you just say in your publicity that you are offering community, you are improving the neighborhood. You know, it's as simple as that, but it's working. It's working for them. Okay, so we have the think tanks and we have the non-for-profits. The non-for-profits, they are the dog watchers. They are in charge of the small scale. They are keeping the business going. They are the ones that when they went to Nietzsche, to public housing, and they were putting electrical switch that were not really switch, but don't give electricity, it was like fake. Those were doing that. You know, things that they are. I happen to be. I was working as an inspector for the city for a month. You know, I did the training and I worked for an inspector. It It was a job, but it was also a way to see what was going on. And I saw this kind of stuff. So we are going to close our star. And, what do I do with the information I have? With the information I have, I send it to the controller. I send it to the newspaper. That was a letter. Send it to the Department of Investigation saying, gee, we don't need a family in New York. We don't really need a family. This is going on. These people is moving. There is a bunch of policies going on. You have to do something about it. So, of course, nothing is done about it, but there is a record of it. I'm going to show you just one simple example. Okay. Appropriation of New York. Okay. Give me a second. Oh, okay. So this is the way that HR and I advertise themselves. We create and implement transformative economic development plans that fuel long-term growth. You can go to the website, and this is Green Capes. This is by Alicia Glenn. Alicia Glenn was fired. She was the deputy mayor. She basically was still in buildings. She was specialized. She was a partner with Jaime Torres Springer. She was specialized in senior housing. The senior housing in Rivington in the Lower East Side was sold for 1/10 of what it cost to a developer. And she ran the whole operation. I had all the numbers, and she was fired for doing that, but still the house is sold and is becoming luxury housing. And now she opened this business that is called Green Capes, making infrastructure happen. This is the way she advertised themselves. We develop and invest in projects that diversity and strength communities. Well, so the way to strengthen communities is put seniors outside, some of them are homeless, and make luxury condos. And here she is, it's very easy to trace. Now she's founder and manager principal of M Square, that is a developer company, and she was deputy mayor for housing and economic development until 2019. You see that, and just showing how to do that. Very simple, LinkedIn. Okay, so here she lives in Harlem. She's my neighbor. And here is Center for an Urban Future. It sounds really great, right? Well, no, it's not. This is John Aucher. He's the board, and he's basically the chair of HR&A advisor. He was a lawyer. His family is coming from a family of developers, and basically Center for a Urban Future is in charge of creating an image. For instance, we really need this kind of new libraries. Why do we have real libraries? Why do we need books anymore? There is another way to run libraries that we don't need that much space. We can take the space from the real libraries and do something compressed that is going to be really better for you. You are going to be into the 21st century. And, it's basically trying to convince you that he's doing really great for the neighborhood, and he had been closing parks and libraries. So that will be the other article, that is the appropriation of public space by in New York, that is about to be published. And this is this guy that I just showed you. He is the Friends of the High Line. He basically, with his friends, bought properties around the High Line, and once the once the park was there, the park was a strategy to create value, right? And we have design trust for public spaces. The other think tank that makes an impact is very important. Edith Rothman is on the board and is also president of HRNA. It's also very easy. He is also owner of Uber. And he ran a competition a few years ago on Design Trust for Public Space for the taxi of New York. He was already launching this kind of vehicle. You know, so it's basically the think tanks clean and clear, and they create competitions. And we all the architects, I had applied to Design Trust for Public Space, thinking that they are really doing something for the city. 20 years ago, I was a kid. I didn't know that they were doing all of that, but they were. Anyway, we had the appropriation of public space in New York that we had no time now, but we are going to just run through an example. And the example is how this scheme works. Okay, we are in 19 Kingsland Avenue, Brooklyn. And this is a building with 8 units, 8 people from the Dominican Republic. I happen to know one of them because she's my tax lady. And she knows I was doing research on real estate, and she got this notice on her door one day, and she called me and said, can you do something about it? And this notice is to inform you that Neighborhood Restore, HDFC, door watchers. This is a non-for-profit. Neighborhood Restore, HDFC, is the new owner of the building in which you live. This is the notice she got one day on her door. She loses the building, and the other people lose the building. They, you know, the title was transferred, and, you know, they got this paper posted on their door, and that was it. That was it. So basically, there was a reason for that. They own taxes and they own water to the city. But this building, the price for this building is $2 million, and they were owning something around $20,000, right? And the building was grabbed by the city for that amount. They were doing that. They had been doing that for 5 years. You know, now they were telling that they lose the building and they had to start paying rent. And Neighborhood Restore was going to, you know, we are going to be controlling the whole process. So this is the letter that, oh God, this is the letter that Judy write this letter explaining the situation, you know, and that became the document that then we took to court and to other things. But basically, she told me, what do we do about it? And, you know, I say, let's make publicity. And our publicity was to hang banners in the building, try to bring light to a dark story. So, okay. And then we have a hearing. Between the day that we hung the banners and the day of the hearing is almost 6 months. And the hearing was basically happened when we bring together another community members and, you know, bring consciousness over the situation and what was happening, right? So basically what was happening is Neighborhood Restore was advising them how to run their own building. There was a new policy in HPD that every HDSC had to have, or should have at least, was advised to have, a non-for-profit that helped you to manage your building. And, you know, but actually the function of this non-for-profit, there are 120 in New York, was to identify a building that have a debt over $3,000. When you have a debt over $3,000, the city have the opportunity to start a foreclosure. The foreclosure start, and you get a letter 45 days saying that a foreclosure is started. Then you go and do a paying plan. When you do a paying plan, you start paying back the amount that you own, plus a 10% interest. 10% interest. 10% interest. So you start paying, they start paying, but arrive to a point that they miss the payment. You know, they were running by a board. The managing that was helping the non-for-profit, they missed a few payments. And that was the moment that this paper went directly to the court and the foreclosure procedure was starting. And that what happened. That's what happened. 6 months later, after that, they got the letter saying that they don't own the building. There are 120 buildings, and of this year, they do what they call a bunch. They do it in bunches. They investigate and identify people that had basically people with no education and immigrants only, to try to grab their buildings. This was the beginning, you know. It was very simple. You know, we made the banner with the you know, neighborhood restore, the non-for-profit is across the street. So we came up with this idea of putting just a picture of the people living in the building and the banner, so other buildings can identify and see what was going on. You know, this is basically my testimony to the hearing. This is the banner. So this is the important part. This is the properties. Basically, with other organization that is called Palante. Let's go. Let's go forward. This is a community organization based in Harlem, and they had been doing this work. They had been going. They got the lease because the building don't even know they are in foreclosure lease. They had been going to the buildings and tell them, you are in a foreclosure lease. You are going to get this notice in a few days, a few months. They don't know. It had 2 years to give to you, and you are going to lose your property. So Palante had been doing that. Then they go to the city council and tell them what happened. Then they investigate the death and try to negotiate a plan, and then go to Leticia James and then try to do a public hearing, and so on and so forth. So this is the work of community organizers done from inside. It's basically done by 3 organizations and it's run by 7 people. And the list is long. And in the other side, you had the 5 points start with the developers, the government, the non-for-profits, the advisors, and the dog watchers, and the think tanks. So it's a very hard work. This is the list. This is the list of the 17. And that was the first time in 2018. That was the happiest day in my 10 years, in my last 10 years. These people got the building back. I got nothing, but I was very happy because I put in use what I know. It's like all this forensic work creates a very thick folder that went to the judge, and the judge decided to go against the ruling, and they reverted the title, you know, and they paid the debt, and they got the building back. But that was one. Also the 120, this is the picture in the newspaper telling this building is back, and here it is, a tiny banner. And why I'm sharing this with you is because I didn't know we were going to get the building back. You know, she just was heartbroken. I was heartbroken, and I just knew I can do something about it, so I did it. And she fought day and night. Everybody in this building fought day and night for almost a year. And just telling you, just everybody watching, you really had to fight, and you have to really fight hard, and you can get things back. You really had fight, but maybe you don't, but still you really had to fight, because through these fights they were saying, oh my god, this is so big, there is no way we're going to get it. And I thought we were not going to get it. But I know we really had to fight, you know. And this is eight people fighting. It just happened to be that one of the Dominican Republic was a tax lady, instead of being completely non-educated and knew English and Spanish and kind of knew how to navigate. He knew me. I put her in touch with the Palante, with the HDFC coalition. I took it to the Leticia James, and I knew the city council. So we kind of ran it. But before that, look at that, highway robbery, broken senior residents protest against city seizing homes. Look at the seniors. There was 6 people protesting. You know, it's pathetic. You know, I mean, this is happening in New York. I mean, we don't need to go to Venice. We don't need to go to Africa. We don't need to go to the refugees. It's like, it's fucking happening in New York, right? It's like, it's right there. And, you know, it was basically a few people fighting for this. This is the woman that got her building back. You know, and that was an example I wanted to share with you of what happened with this network of developers, realtor groups, and advisors are running the city. We are not running the city, and this is why we don't have affordable housing, because basically they had this program, the TPT program, three party transfer. Every time a building is grabbed from the city, it's sold to a developer for $1. You can look for it in Acris. You search for it. You have to go by the street. I mean, the way you search for it is you search for the foreclosure first, and then you have to search in Acris for the addresses, and then you got the buildings that have been sold for $1. So, you know, this is just happening in New York, and you know, this is her building again. And she was so lucky. She was so lucky and arrived on a moment, you know. Now we were making banners for all the other buildings, and you know, I started working with them 2 years ago when I went to Rome to do a project there. But you know, basically there is not enough people in New York helping to do that, but it's possible. It's just possible. If you are able to produce documentation, you can stop it. But you know, the developers are running high. The war is really hard, and Nelson Avenue, so forth and so forth. That was Nelson Avenue. They are still fighting, and you know, it's the Bronx, and this is a big building. and it's really pathetic. You know, I went there when I was working as an inspector. The conditions are bad, and the other strategy that they use is they never fix the buildings when they call 311. The conditions are bad because that's the way you can grab a building. You can grab a building for two elements. One, you have a death of 3,000, and two, you are not keeping the building into shape, but you know, it's on purpose. It's like, you know, it's like a cycle. So anyway, that's basically the 5 points star of corruption going on in New York, and I really hope the new administration is a little better. And thank you, Pablo, for giving me the opportunity to show that. And please go to Civic Gaps, the family of the appropriation, and you will see a little bit of this forensic work. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Hana, for sharing these stories that we see every day in the city of New York. And for, as an architect, you're doing an activism from the bottom up. Hopefully, the top down is able to change likewise. I hope that the correspondent institutions are able to hear what we can offer so that the city can get back to its people. So thank you for sharing this with us. Now we're going to go to the next panelist. The next panelist is M7 Red, Pío Torroja, Mauricio Corbalán, who are architects from Buenos Aires and former colleagues of mine from the University of Buenos Aires. The lecture description is a brief related to the issue of the map and the territory. The map is a continuation of the territory by other means. The Campo Maripe community and the shale gas oil field of Vaca Muerta in Argentina. M7 Red participated in 2018 and 2019 with the Mapuche community Campo Maripe in the complex scenario of Vaca Muerta. Vaca Muerta is the largest shale gas reserve in South America. It is important to understand the trends that are developing there in order to grasp the tensions and dangers that extractivism is incubating in the global crisis of COVID-19, but also understand the specificities of the situation. The local and its complexities and potential seem to be way out of the prevailing growing abstraction and simplification. The situation may constitute a political program. It is part of the projects of M7 Red to return, and as soon as possible, new restrictions allowed, to be able to, for the Campo Maripe community to continue working with them on the situation of the National Survey of Indigenous Territories, Law 26,160, Territorial Survey Program of Indigenous Community, RETECI, that seeks to know the territorial situation of the indigenous communities. The lecture name, The Map, is a continuation of the territory by other means, relates to the Campo Maripe community, as we said before, in shale gas oil field in Vaca Muerta. M7 Red 2005 is an independent network of socially engaged architects and spatial planners. They work with citizens, especially underrepresented communities, to counteract developments that impact negatively on communal spaces. Rejecting top-down processes of public decision-making, M7 Red collaborate with stakeholders, network with relevant experts, and create innovative tools that clarify power relationships, vested interest, and political pressures, thereby empowering people to claim their rights in public space. M7 Red is Mauricio Corbalán and Pío Torroja in association with individuals, groups, and organizations, according to the processes and situations of investigation and intervention. Both Mauricio and Pío were architect professors at the University of Buenos Aires, but they developed their field of action independently and through the commitment to the stages and their collectives. Since then, they have been working hypotheses in that the knowledge necessary for all coevolution is immanent to those particular scenarios. They recently received the Prince Claus Award in Architecture in 2020. For more information, you can refer to m7red.info or .net. Thank you for joining us. Welcome, Mauricio and Pío.
Gracias, Pablo. Thank you, Pablo, for inviting us and to give us the opportunity to show what we have been doing in the last couple of years. Specifically, this research was done together with the people of forensic architecture, Eyal Weissman and all of his team that is based in London. And just something to brief you on is in 2019, the beginning of 2019, the people from The Guardian request the people of forensic architecture about to produce a report on what was going on in Vaca Muerta, because there was the death of a worker in an oil rig in Vaca Muerta. And they contact us in order to make the field work in the oil field. So we have been collaborating with them before in another project. We said, okay, so we can do that, because for us was a collaboration between the request of a big media like The Guardian and forensic architecture. And they were very much focused on because there was a strategy that The Guardian was changing their strategy in order to inform about climate change and the oil and gas industry. And they were very much interested in to show what the polluters, the big polluters, were doing in several territories around the world. So it was a change of perspective, you know. So instead of going on with this discourse on climate change, like it was a worldwide responsibility, it was they were focusing on denouncing the big polluters. So in 2019, they focus on the oil field of Vaca Muerta. Vaca Muerta is in the North Patagonia, in a province called Neuquén, that is in Argentina. And what there is a big presence of the Mapuche community. The Mapuche community that is, they have been inhabiting those lands since very far away, and distributed between what is now the territory of Chile and Argentina, you know. So, but also there was some frictions between the Mapuche community and the national government here in Argentina, very much different than what happened and what is going on in Chile. So they are very similar, but they have very, very strong differences. And this is what we are focusing now on our research, you know. So, we would like to share with you with the field work we did in the I think it was around October and November of 2019. We produced a material that was assembled by the people of forensic architecture later, and it was showcased in the Guardian media. And it's a video. Okay. No. Can you see it?
Yes.
Okay. Oh, sorry, this is another video.
Ponele reinicio.
Okay. ¿Dónde?
Ustedes, no sé.
How freaking, yeah, this one, yeah. Okay. Sorry, the advertising that.
Algo que no puedes, tendría que suceder, ¿no? Pero esas son las consecuencias del fracking.
This oil fire burned for more than 3 weeks next to a freshwater lake here in Vaca Muerta, Argentina, one of the world's largest deposits of shale oil and gas, and home to the indigenous Mapuche people. 6 years ago, protests by Mapuche activists and their supporters outside government offices in the region were met with tear gas. Inside, an agreement was being approved that would open up their lands to the global oil and gas industry. Argentina's state-run oil company, YPF, has operated these oil fields in Vaca Muerta for decades. But the 2013 agreement saw the US giant Chevron enter the region. Chevron was followed by Shell, Total, ExxonMobil, and Pan American Energy, a subsidiary of BP. Chevron began fracking for oil and gas here in the Loma Campana oil field. But the ownership of this land is in dispute. A 2015 government report recognized the rights of a local Mapuche community to this 40-square-mile area, which overlaps with Chevron's oil field. The report records the buildings belonging to the local Mapuche community, called Campo Maripe. This structure is a communal building known as a ruca. It was built in 2013 to monitor the activities of the oil and gas companies in the area. Just months later, the day after the protests when the Chevron agreement was signed, the ruca burned down in what the report called an intentional fire. At that time, there was only one extraction site in the area. Less than a year later, dozens of new extraction sites are visible across the region. Fracking produces large quantities of toxic byproducts, which are stored and processed at facilities like this one, which has grown substantially between 2014 and 2018. Local activists gathered these images and videos, which would form the basis of a 2018 lawsuit, which alleges that the facility was putting the health of local communities in danger. According to the lawsuit, 500,000 litres of toxic waste arrives at the site every day from nearby extraction sites. This video, taken by a worker at the site, shows the pools in which that waste is stored. The lawsuit alleges that the conditions in which waste is stored risks contaminating the local water supply and violates local regulations. It also claims that the waste pools are less than the legally required distance from the city of Anelo and the nearby river. Around the time the lawsuit was filed, there was another major oil spill at another site nearby called La Caverna. A workers' camp next to the site was completely flooded with oil. Oil leaked into the surrounding environment for 36 hours. After footage of the spill was published online, workers were banned from taking smartphones onto the site. The damage is visible on satellite images for weeks after. But activists shared videos with us that documented other recent incidents across the surrounding oil fields. The rapid expansion of the oil and gas industry in Vaca Muerta is visible in the sequence of satellite images from 2013 to the present day. Satellite sensors which register changes in vegetation reveal sustained loss of vegetation during this time, seen here in yellow. This environmental evidence supports the local Mapuche community's claim that the oil and gas industry has irreversibly damaged their ancestral homeland, and with it, their traditional way of life.
Well, This was the piece that was produced together with forensic architecture for The Guardian. And I would like also to share with you. Oof.
No, what?
Okay.
La primera.
Esta.
Allá arriba.
Okay.
Y presentar.
Okay. So in the video, you could see that there was the whole scenario was presented as a reconstruction of something that happened, and it was assembled as an evidence of what was going on between the Campo Maripe community and the oil companies that are operating in Vaca Muerta. But when we went there, we display our methodology of working that we call complex scenarios. And in that way, instead of going backwards to reconstruct what was happened, we wanted to focus on to analyze and meet with the people that were doing these events, and to know how this fabric was made in the past and was going into the future. Here you can see one representative of the Mapuche community, and he's showing an ad of the it's like the
win.
Yeah, when they won a situation to one of the oil companies. This is very important, because I think this is what in one of the rucas, no? So the rucas are these community centers that were destroyed, as you could see in the video. And they're very important because these places are also monitoring how the oil companies are working in the area. So so this is very strategic, because it's like what we are going to see now is how these people are part of a very complex fabric of associations in the past and in the future.
Because we have these two contradictory situations. If we want to see from or through the eyes of the community, we need to focus in these two directions. One is to reconstruct the lost, an object in the past, but we need to see the future from his eyes or through his eyes. And this image represents a beginning from the community. And this is not an object. This is a process. They start the process, and we will talk a little bit about that process. And we have these two thoughts about our work now. We need to criticize the forensic object in one hand, but we need the forensic object to put that scenario in the media, in other places in the region or in the country. But we need to build with the community or through the community this process. Why? Because this process contains the life of the community, contains the world that they are producing. And this is very different to reconstruct an object.
If you listen to the final voice in the video, I think there is the position from the big media about these scenarios, where they saying okay, this is a fight between the big oil companies and here they are called pueblos originarios, you know, so and indigenous people. But it's more complex than that. It's not just antagonists. There are antagonists sometimes. They negotiate a lot of the time, and they have a very complex identity, you know. So you cannot trap all of the actors in just one identity. So this is a process of how they regain and they create and build a new identity. So this is something from the story of the place and the people living there. During the 100 years ago was the first time that oil was found in the North Patagonia region of Neuquén, and this was what part of the Patagonia region that was part of the national territory of Argentina, but it has no proper jurisdiction. It was a national territory, you know, but it wasn't a province, more or less like in Canada, you know. So in the mid 50s, this region became a province with autonomy, with an autonomous government. And they started a process of development, and this comprised the building of a huge hydroelectric dam called El Chocón, that was at the same time that was developing the oil industry. And this development was made in the 50s by national companies, by state-owned national companies. The more known is IPF, that it used to be the National Oil Company. So it was the years of the welfare state that all of these people that were working in these huge enterprises were workers that were part of a welfare state and were unionized in unions that were very strong. They were having a lot of benefits also, because if you were living in Patagonia, you have another tax, you have tax exemptions and a lot of benefits related to education and public health and a lot of that, you know. So because it was the new frontier, you know, so how to develop the new frontier in Patagonia. Well, this came to an end in the 90s when there was the privatization, the huge privatization program that was held by President Menem, and that was under the umbrella of the Consensus of Washington. And there was a huge privatization of YPF, the National Oil and Gas Company. And the first frictions and the first fights that because when the company was privatized, there was huge redundancies of workers, especially in this area of Neuquén and Patagonia. And there were the first movements that were called of protest of people that were excluded from the formal work after decades of receiving benefits and full employment and support and all of that. From one day to another, they were laid off, and many infrastructures of this company were closed down, and the impact was huge. But there was a first movement of resistance called, probably you know, called the Piqueteros movement that really changed the way of resistance in Argentina in the mid-90s. And this was also part of the crisis of 2001. And this was people from these oil companies that they were, many of them were from Mapuche descent, but till then they were just workers of the national oil company. This movement what happened in a place called Utralco that became nationally famous because it was the first uprising of a new way of resist that was picketing lines along national roads. So it was also a logistic movement because it was a strategy. Okay, so we were laid off of our former employment, but we can do something, and it was a way of cutting the logistic lines, especially
this marks a completely new forms of politics here in Argentina. And in the same moment, in the same new ways of make politics here, there was the first rebirth of the Mapuche community there.
Yeah. So as Pio said, it was very interesting that Mapuche community wasn't a matter of pride before the rising of the piqueteros, because it was like many other groups of pueblos originarios in South America, you know, so they were hidden themselves, hidden their own identities because they were part of a nation state.
They had their language.
Yeah, so just even the Mapuche language, it wasn't shown on public media because it was something that was not forgotten, but it was out of the public sphere, you know. So, and in that way, the Mapuche rebirth is connected with the rising of the piqueteros because it was like a training situation for gaining a new way of resistance and identity.
I want to say this. From the 30s to the, I don't know, 90s, like this, we have these two very, very contradictory situations for the Mapuche community. They was integrated in the welfare state in one hand, but in another hand, they was completely excluded, no, ¿cómo se diría? Excluded, we can say.
Yeah.
At the same time.
Yeah. So this, I think this is what we're interested now, is like to see how this shift is evolving, and also because there are probably 2 years before we did this research, there were a lot of frictions, and there was in the media something about that these people could become terrorists, you know, so they were labeled under the tag of probably these people could be terrorists, you know. So, and this is very delicate in Argentina because what happened in the 70s here about the target of people that were labeled as terrorists is part of the backbone of how is democracy supported here in Argentina. So that is very delicate. So and this is very much overlapped with the situation of in the oil field of Vaca Muerta that was, imagine, because Vaca Muerta was discovered in the 30s, but the shale gas boom happened in the States before in the 90s, but the technology available here started right in the rediscovery of Vaca Muerta that was in 2010, 2011, you know, so this process has been very short, but it was a promising, you know, so of that fracking bring Argentina, that is always in a very problematic economical situation, because it's very much in debt and all of that, as probably you know by the media, so it's the promise of becoming like Saudi Arabia of fracking, so this put a lot of pressure in these territories, but also this was an interesting situation for the claiming of the Mapuche community, because there was there were suddenly again in the spotlight, not only of national media but also of global media, So and this is the map of the land claim, where there are overlaps all of the claims and the property borders, So between the ancestral territory, the current territory, and the territory that is in claim. The government I think it was 10 years ago, more or less, they started a survey of indigenous land in the whole of Argentina. And I think it still is going on,
Yes,
so
yes.
It was because there are many
dispute.
there are many disputes going on, and especially in this region that is related to the oil and gas industry. There are constantly new problems. And before the pandemic, there was a crisis in in this whole region of Vaca Muerta, because even in the middle, they were saying that the fracking wasn't sustainable anymore, and that the fracking companies in the States were going bust, and that the boom was over, and all of that. So there were a lot of bad predictions about the future of Vaca Muerta. But during the pandemic, the boom started again, So and now is the production of oil and gas especially, is in full speed, So and the deployment of another actors of the oil and gas industry is becoming more and more strong. So that will bring and now we know that there are many conflicts arising again, but our interest now is to develop a research about how this complex scenario is turning into something that is composing something new, that it has different layers of several ways of inhabiting, of negotiating, and also of mapping their own land, and also this is how this dispute will appear in this contested cartography that it has been built there, that you could see in this image. Something more?
We are now starting to work in new maps with the community, because they are political flags to put in the conflict of this law, is the ¿cómo se dice? La ley de
the survey.
The survey law. But I want to remark this. We see that it's very important to focus on the contradictions in the territory, because if you are trying to give to any actor in the complex scenario one fixed identity, you are killing them, or you are killing that actor, or you are reducing their force, their power. For example, we need to focus carefully in the paradox, if you want to say that there are a lot of people in the Mapuche community that are part of the oil industry, and they know a lot about that industry, and they are now using that knowledge to rebuild their community, but they are still having relations with the companies. They are still working with them. And we have the two situations at the same time. They are fighting against the state and the companies and the global companies, but they are dealing with them and working with them.
Yeah, so yeah. This is what we are very much interested, because otherwise what we don't want to go through is this idea of that there is a kind of purity gap, you know. So then, you know, so the
and in that overlapping and in that hybridity, I don't know the word, we see that the power is there in the contradiction, in the paradox.
Yeah, well,
okay,
that
right.
was all.
Thank you so much, Pio and Mauricio. We're going to discuss after the next presentation. Don't say you want to introduce the next speaker?
Yes, great. Thank you very much. I know it's getting a little bit late, but please bear with us. We have one more presenter here, and I'm sure it's going to be equally interesting and fascinating. So we have Zuleika Ayub, who is a doctoral candidate at Princeton University School of Architecture and Design. So I'll give you a brief introduction. And she's also a co-director of the Luxure Fantasy Lab. She is trained as an architect. Her research is mostly concerned with systems of media, secrecy, and technology in relation to Manhattan Project and subsequent nuclear armaments. Reading across valences of drawing, image, science, and text, and adopting methodologies from critical geography and new materialism in addition to architecture. She aims to portray more accurately these histories and their entanglements with the present. Key to this work is keeping an open field approach. Moments, things, people, buildings are already situated, just like the knowledges that are explicitly or invisibility produced within, between, around, and around them. Zuleika's is a co-director and head of expressions of the Luxure Fantasy Lab and founding member of the Graph Critical Geography Collective. She holds a BArch from Cooper Union, Master's in Design Studies with distinction for Harvard University, and is completing her dissertation entitled Translations from Drawing to Bombing and Other Disarrays at Princeton University. And she has taught graduate and undergraduate design studios, lectures, seminars at Pratt Institute, Mississippi State University, Catholic University of America, Mountain View Correctional Facility, and City College of New York. So just a brief note on her presentation. The title is On the Line, Aesthetics of Drawing Things Together. And because of time, I think we'll just get into the presentation. So thank you very much.
Thank you both for the introduction and of course for the invitation. And if only this was in person, we could get to know each other more and so, but I'll get a move on with the slideshow instead. So the screen, I imagine the presentation is showing, yes, and you can hear me well, great. Okay, so the talk is called On the Line, the Aesthetics of Drawing Things Together. Lineament, trace, stroke, limit, edge, contour, border, divide. An abundance of synonyms have been and are associated with the act of marking lines, some doubling as verbs too. The word line appears in idioms referring to agreement, in line with, Discovery, get a line on. Inspection, line up. Conformity, toe the line. And risk, on the line. Then there are the lines of architectural drawings, codified expressions which, depending on where they are situated upon the theory-practice spectrum, at minimum confer a set of spatial and material parameters for construction while also bringing the architect's practice in touch with legal apparatuses. The questions I am typically interested in when it comes to the discipline of architecture and its line-making practices is defining the exact register of where ethic and aesthetic converge or deflect, and to take it even further, how they co-form and co-produce. What is on the line, so to speak, is the line itself. 1. Is this a drawing? You may recognize some reminiscence of how I'm defining and situating line here to the ways in which Deleuze and Guattari define drawing and mapping. Given the nuances and even impossibility of translation when it comes to words from one discipline or language to another, let's take a closer look. On drawing, and as Brian Masumi points out in his translation of 1,000 Plateaus into English, he says, in 1,000 Plateaus, to draw is an act of creation. What is drawn does not pre-exist the act of drawing. The French word tracer captures this better. It has all the graphic connotations of to draw in English, but can also mean to blaze a trail or open a road. To trace, de calquer, on the other hand, is to copy something from a model. What this conceptualization reveals at the simplest or perhaps most obvious register is how inadequate a single linguistic representation, in this case, the string of letters D-R-A-W-I-N-G is. For an audience of architects, this alone is likely not a new concept for you. So let's go further in order to distill some other properties or notions, starting with Deleuze and Guattari's proclamation that you should make a map, not a tracing. Masumi's earlier note helps us understand what they mean by tracing. Again, a copy from a model. But what do they mean by map? What distinguishes the map from the tracing is that it is entirely oriented toward an experimentation in contact with the real. It fosters connections between fields. It is detachable, reversible, susceptible to constant modification. It can be drawn on a wall, conceived of as a work of art, constructed as a political action or as a meditation. A map has multiple entryways as opposed to the tracing, which always comes back to the same. The map has to do with performance, whereas the tracing always involves an alleged competence, to which I would add this competence means towards reproducing sameness. How well and how accurate can you reproduce something that already exists? However, and as they themselves state, have we not reverted to a simple dualism by contrasting maps to tracings as good as bad sides? And does not a map contain phenomena of redundancy that are already like tracings of its own? The answer to their own question is, oh, something happened here. Oh, here we go. It is a question of method. The tracing should always be put back on the map, for it is inaccurate to say that a tracing reproduces the map. Tracing is instead like a photograph or an X-ray that begins by selecting or isolating by artificial means such as colorations or other restrictions, the intention to reproduce. The tracing has already translated the map into an image. And I think for an audience of architects, this is something we're also familiar with in terms of the discussion of how far do you allow the tool to determine the outcome, whether you're working in Revit, Rhino, by hand sketching, etc. And this is somewhat resonant, I think of that. So we have the benefit of seeing how this method plays out in 1,000 Plateaus due to the abundance of visual materials they themselves included in the book. Film stills, photographs, sketches by the authors themselves, paintings, textiles, etc. What is unconventional or radical about this is not so much that these materials vary in medium or in kind, but that their respective relations to the text is not one of description, elaboration, or metaphor, i.e. this image is like this concept. That's not what they're doing. Things we see versus things we read are not siloed corollaries from one another. This is like that. Nor are they better or worse simply by how they are classified or identified. A painting is not simply better or worse than a poem on the basis of classification. And where a blueprint begins and ends in time and space is not as simple as the edge of the paper or the duration of labor used to produce it. In architectural juries, this reminds me of times when a juror would say, while pointing to a piece of paper on a wall that looks like a floor plan, and say, this is not a drawing, it is an illustration. So I'm a little grateful that so many years later, I can finally understand what that means. So to distill, going back to Deleuze and Guattari, so to distill this a bit, maps are experimental processes, performances with the real. They foster connections and make contact between fields of knowledge. Traces are already prefigured to capture and reveal only selectively. One way that I think of this when doing my own research is that I can recognize mappiness when it has durational resonance or it forms important connections or relations to things that are not clearly visible or recognizable, like many examples we actually saw from the other speakers today. This also means that what is conventionally understood as a map may not be a map at all in the Deleuzian-Guattarian sense, and vice versa, where, say, the stain of coffee on a freshly ironed dress shirt is a map. Now what this philosophy does or can do in practice is actually unprison the things that representationalism box in, it delimits or divides, hence the term line. A word is not always just a word. A drawing is not always just a drawing. What Deleuze and Guattari are not suggesting, however, is a pure untethering or an invitation for a carefree orgy of interpretation. If there is anything to be said about 1,000 Plateaus overall, it is that it is a text concerned with the dangers of fascism, capitalism, and warfare. And furthermore, it takes on the very difficult task of how knowledge production is actually infused, complicit, and distributed therein. 2. Blinding flash. If photography was simply a method of engraving with light, where bodies inscribed their traces by virtue of their own luminosity, nuclear weapons inherited both the darkroom and the military searchlight. What appears in the heart of darkrooms is no longer a luminous outline, but a shadow on the walls of the city. This is from Paul Virilio in War and Cinema. So writes close colleague of Deleuze and Guattari and theorist of architecture, urbanism, and media, Paul Virilio in 1984. War and Cinema, the logistics of perception. The bodily traces on city walls he refers to are the dark outlines seen in photographs taken in Hiroshima and Nagasaki in the days and weeks following the atomic bombings of August 6th and 9th, 1945. Often referred to as atomic shadows or human shadows, such photographs are often understood as a register of a literal shadow caused by a blinding flash. The resemblance of the human contour, together with the cascade of tonal difference captured on film, in which this contour that I'm kind of tracing, outlining here, is rendered darker than that of the surrounding stone, seems to invoke a parallel in viewers who have witnessed their own shadow upon stone, concrete, or gravel in day-to-day life. What perhaps invokes the feeling of horror, which it did in confronting these particular images, the recognition is twofold. One, that our intimacy with our own bodily projections, our own shadows that we see all the time, is simultaneous with the recognition that our fleshy body is here, even though we can't see it. Just like we can see the entire outline of our shadow, our body's outline and shadow, but we can never see ourselves because, you know, our eyes are here, et cetera, et cetera. This means we cannot survey ourselves. We can't look over ourselves. We can't take care of ourselves in real time and space. And perhaps this is one way in which this photograph strikes horror. Secondly, it also strikes horror because this fleshy body that we can't look over, we can't survey, it can actually evaporate in the same speed of time as a single camera flash. So in terms of the actual physical phenomena that is best understood and described by science, what likely happened here is that there was a person sitting directly on the stone surface, not standing adjacent to it with casting a shadow, when the initial flash of light was emitted from the nuclear detonation, which has the effect of lightening the stone surface we see around the dark contour. So this stuff, basically meaning that the entire stone used to be this tone. After the flash, everything else got exposed to the light and in fact lightened. Despite the popular myth surrounding this photograph, it is not registering the shadow of an evaporated body for two reasons. One, the instant evaporation of flesh and bone body is extremely unlikely. The temperatures, despite the very high temperatures of a nuclear detonation that would have been at the epicenter, it still couldn't do it in a flash. It would take time for the body to evaporate. And two, if the temperature spike in that area was hot enough, as I mentioned, it would occur after, not before the lightning flash. So if this was taken at the moment of the lightning flash, the body would still be there essentially. If it was taken after the lightning flash, if this was, sorry, it would not have happened instantaneously with the light flash. Now, probabilistically, this person did die from the bomb and within seconds or minutes following the detonation, just not microseconds, either by being thrown at a high velocity against another hard surface and or from being burned to death. Either way, this is a moment of unspeakable horror and unimaginable violence, perhaps unseeable violence. So why go through these tedious calculations about heat and microseconds, etc.? So on one hand, the particular phenomena that the photograph registers is able to instantiate Virilio's point I made earlier about the walls of the city being the new media surface of nuclear warfare, as opposed to the walls of the darkroom, for instance. More importantly, it is that such a process, such a process that a cartographic drawing out in the Deleuzian sense is just one of relatively few visual artifacts from the epicenters of the Japan bombings, and they reveal so much more of the entanglements involved in nuclear weapons history, including how representation, meaning the seeable and the sayable, is produced, obscured, censored, controlled, negated, and so on. And these are the microseconds following a detonation as captured by military scientists. To know is to see. This metaphorical trope is certainly not new. It has a long, long history, both in terms of knowledge production more generally, and obviously to architecture specifically. Vanishing points, 1 and 2 point perspectives, bird's eye axonometry, all carry in their names a reference to the mode of seeing they invoke. Plans and sections, while not calculated to mimic embodied vision, hold the promise of letting us see even that which our eyes cannot. Similar to the link between knowing and seeing is an equally long history linking ignorance to blindness. In terms of the Manhattan Project, this metaphor of blindness is so often invoked in its history and also in regards to its architecture alike when describing nuclear science in the 1940s and 1950s. However, the physiological condition of blindness, of blind spots, of which this is an image of glaucoma slowly blinding the eye of a Japanese survivor, the physiological condition of blindness is rarely noted in comparison, which is curious given that the detonation of an atomic bomb produces an array of ocular deformities ranging from temporary flash blindness in distant observers to literal melted eyes running down from hollowed eye sockets in victims that are still living. Not for long, but they were living. In fact, the accounts basically say that when certain people came across them, despite the fact that literally that was happening, they kept saying, I can't see, why can't I see? So that's how quick this kind of blindness occurs, where the brain hasn't yet caught up with the fact as to why. Per Nicholas Mirzoff, visuality suitors authority to power and renders this association natural. I want to just say that again. Visuality suitors authority to power and renders this association natural. So the stakes are high in understanding the construction of visuality and the alleged incommensurability of representation that separates spheres of knowledge. As high, I would argue, as Hiroshima's 47% death toll. Decades before Mirzoff, Aurelio, and Deleuze, it was certainly not lost on the head of the Manhattan Project, General Leslie Groves, of the strategic value of the unknowable. And he was in fact remarkably clear on this point, as seen in the opening pages of the earliest governmental account of the Manhattan Project. Oh, sorry, forgot a few slides. Here we go. One of the chief difficulties in securing data for this volume arose from restrictions necessarily placed by security on the early operations of the project. Many of the transactions were carried on orally to ensure secrecy, and thus no written record was preserved. In other instances, data were destroyed to further protect the secret of the bomb. Alongside this idea of secrecy, which occurs over and over and over again, historical accounts of the Manhattan Project are rife with statements like, well, if we didn't do it first, the Germans would have, which was Einstein's claim, or later, if we didn't use it first, the Russians would have, which they didn't. The very material substance of uranium and plutonium and the enormous logistics empire created using billions of dollars and hundreds of thousands of laborers prove that the atomic bomb was anything but innocent discovery, that the demolition of life and planet was anything but a natural event, or as some architects have argued, it was entirely inconceivable. Indeed, it was a short leap from blaming the Nazis, who actually abandoned their atomic project way before anything useful could be determined towards building a practical nuclear weapon, to blaming the Russian communists, who to date have never used a nuclear weapon against civilians, to the most ridiculous, yet still widely accepted belief that the US detonated 2 bombs over Japan precisely in order to save Japanese lives. Since my time is running up and I actually wanted to keep to the 15-minute limit, I'm going to wrap it up with one more time. Lineament, trace, stroke, limit, edge, contour, border, divide. An abundance of synonyms have been and are associated with the act of marking lines, some doubling as verbs too. What lines are not, however, is inconsequential. Lines are never only merely abstractions. Lines are never only representational. Lines are also never the same, even in repetition. The end.
Great, fantastic. Thank you very much. Pablo, do you want to make some comments, or do you want me to just transition to
no, I mean,
questions?
Either way, because we are running out of time, and this event is supposed to be 2 hours only. But I think that is a moment maybe we can do. I just want to appreciate the ranges of action that each of the presenters did, and perhaps we open up for a discussion. To me, one of the not only we have been exposed to a range of critical actions in terms of what architecture is supposed to be, but also I think that we live in times that are very difficult, and that we cannot afford any longer to accept the architecture role to design buildings, right? I think that that's one of the things that I think is becoming clear across the 4 presentations, that each of the presenters are in their own means and in their own work, they're trying to address, first identify what are the parameters of the problem, and then after addressing those parameters, understanding what would be meaningful in terms of what are the ranges of possibilities relative to an architecture action. To me, the question perhaps addressed to everybody, and maybe don't say you can jump in and see where we can go in the brief minutes. I don't want to extend beyond 8:30, but the question is, all the presentations seem to be addressing the issues from the bottom up. Are we able to continue accepting the parameters in terms of what architecture is supposed to be? And I think that each of you present different possibilities of actions that are not accepting what are we supposed to be doing as architects, and even the institutions that represent architects are assigning as a kind of power territory. I don't know if anybody wants to jump in, but I think that some people may think, and also some people may think, oh, well, this is so devastating, all the things that you show, and it's very negative. But I would actually argue that your activism is very positive in the sense that it's not nihilistic. I think that we need to distinguish real positive action. I think that what you're doing is because you have a positive action because you want to change reality, as opposed to people that are happily accepting reality as a given, and they think that they are just being positive. I think that we need to distinguish that difference. So I really wanted to appreciate that because I think it's a different type of hope. I don't believe much in Obama's hope, to be honest. I believe more in the kind of action that you are presenting. So I don't know if anybody wants to jump in terms of what you presented, because it's so different and the ranges are so diverse. But I think that you are enacting and discovering parameters in reality that you are trying to express through your own work and through your own life, actually.
Maybe, I mean, I'm sure all of the presenters have their own view on that, but if I can just add one kind of thing and expand this discussion, or maybe focus this discussion a little bit, is the role of representation through maps or mapping, which is distinguished from tracing. And I think obviously it has a great relationship to architecture. And when line is drawn, it can be a partition wall within a building, and it can be at a different scale, nation-state borders. And if we think about the role of the representation and mapping in particular, and then kind of continue the discussion that Pablo started, I think that would be a great way to continue our conversation. So maybe Sean, would you like to start?
Sure. I first of all, I certainly appreciated everyone's presentations, and thank you all. What I see, I think the bookends, if you will, of my presentation, beginning with borders and perhaps concluding with Zuleika's online, is that is exactly what Zuleika has written and spoken about, which is that lines once inscribe and build versions of power, and that power often, more often than not, creates forms of violence that are at multiple scales. The kind of violence that we saw in Hana's project and her activism, in terms of the displacement, forced displacement of individuals from their homes, as well as with the Mapuche, and the fact that we can, in effect, inscribe a space, a 40-hectare, I think you said, space that is only the Mapuche space, and one step out of that semi-indeterminate space or line then is the YPF or the space for fracking. So the fragility of lives, of the environment, of economics, of politics often rests and resists by virtue of this line that is inscribed in space. But what, to your point, Pablo and Dongse, is that I think what, in essence, what we see with all of the presentations in a way is to not take anything for granted anymore, that the ways in which architecture and pedagogy and discourse have happened over centuries, but over years, for instance, has been predicated on so-called rules or conventions that we, as students, for instance, might accept, akin to Zuleika's comment around illustration versus what a ground plan is, right? I think this also applies to history, and I think it also applies to how we begin to rethink and reimagine the very spaces in which we live, design and build. And we see that with the kind of ignition, if you will, of discourse around indigeneity and who owns land and whose land is it, especially around land acknowledgement and so forth, that emerged out of the Australian context. It is now taking hold here in the United States, and often in South America as well. So that's just a very long response, I think, but I feel like I think we are all also working in very different ways and in different institutional spaces that often allow, or not even institutional spaces, just spatial practices that demand a rethinking of the very ways in which we see the world and that we see each other.
I just wanted to add to your words, Shen, and that I was thinking that during your presentation, you know, so these images of wall borders and these huge refugee camps that are becoming permanent cities, you know, so and what happened during the pandemics, you know, so that all of these quarantine measures that were taken by governments all over the world, you know, so that suddenly the reality that happened in refugee camps that spill all over cities worldwide, you know, so that the borders came into our homes, you know, so and then these biopolitics that are still in display, you know, especially I was thinking the example of Australia, you know, so this policy they have on refugees and these strict lockdowns they are going on. So this is the imagination of the political representation, you know, so political representation is what we are talking right now, you know, so during the last month here in Chile, you know, so they are discussing a new constitution, you know, so because they think that they have to rebuild completely their own country, you know, so and the Mapuche risings that were seen just 3 years ago, like, you know, so we are having problems with these people in the south of the country, and suddenly there was a Mapuche representative, a woman that was elected in front of the assembly that will rewrite the Constitution of Chile. That is like rocket science, you know, so for a country like Chile in South America, you know, so that was seen a kind of neoliberal economic miracle just a couple of years ago, you know, so I think the indicates that we've been spelled out of the perimeter of buildings, you know, so that we were enclosed during many years, you know, so now it's like there are no limits in a way, you know, so we need to rework this political representation and the ecological crisis we are going through, you know, so in that sense is that yeah, there is no other way than the bottom up, you know, so there is no other way to think about and also not only about space but also about time, you know, so how can we think time in a different way and not the linear time that we're used by the media, you know, so these tales about who are you, who you are not, you know, so these fixed identities that they were being distributed by the media all over the world, you know, so now we need to think, and these rearrangements, I think architecture has a lot to say about that, you know, so.
Yeah, I wanted to maybe add that I think that it is sort of relative spatially, temporally to what the circumstance and situation is. And a lot of it's just, I'm sorry, there's a dog that I don't know who is in the co-working space apparently that I rented coming up to me. But I wanted to say that it's circumstantial, like it's tactical, right? It's not to say that like suddenly you don't draw a floor plan because there's a kind of ontological precarity or weirdness to it, for instance. For sure, it's tactical. And I think that's the type of activism intersecting with architecture work that like we certainly saw today and in general is a possibility. I know for myself, having been so removed from practice right now, I'm in like the thick of the, the kind of Ivy League academy. It's not to, I don't take a position, for instance, that I'm here to learn things and then spread the knowledge around, right? No, it's like I'm inserted in a condition where I actually find it the responsibility to show in that context how the violences and things that are in the very things that we do without realizing. So I think the circumstantial thing and the way that architecture, when thought of outside of, to go back to Pablo's point about kind of prefigured economic, financial systems, is always to kind of go in from the middle. And I mean, everyone here seems smart enough to figure out what kind of tactics are necessary in order to kind of push out, but never, I mean, hierarchies existed from the beginning of human civilization. It's not like that top-down pressure is new. There's certainly a lot of very different challenges and different types of deaths and precarities in the world, but like always coming from the inside outward, I think is one spatially relative way to approach that problem.
But my only question is, because we have been trying from the bottom up for several decades now, and we know that the environmental crisis, we're not going to be able to solve it from the bottom up unless it is globally coordinated. The same with the social crisis, or the same with the, even the pandemic, right? If it is not globally coordinated, you're out of the game. So my problem is that I think that we are accepting, when we say that we can operate from the bottom up, we are accepting the neoliberal individualist strategy, that everything is personalized, that the responsibility rests on the individual, rather than thinking that collectively, right, you could actually intervene at the level in which that problem has been generated. Because if you think about in Hana's terms, right, that there is actually a kind of law, it's like kind of law implicit system that is running and evicting people just violently from the top down. I wonder, I mean, and I appreciate, Hana, your activism, but the question is, how can we address the problems at the same level in which they were originated? That would be my question to the panels, because I don't think that you can, but I don't think you can solve the economic, the environmental crisis with individual recycling. I do recycling, but you're not going to go anywhere unless it's globally coordinated. The same with the pandemic, right? I can be vaccinated. I comply with my duty, but nothing is going to happen unless it is globally coordinated, right? So I have the feeling that we are running in circles, and that Republicans in that sense are very clever because they intervene at the level of the law. And then the Democrats, they try to catch up, and always the field is moved to the right? It's like every year is worse. So I just wonder, what do you think about that?
Just wanted to say, now I understand, by bottom up, you're saying from the individual, from the one up being the many, but I would also challenge and say that I don't know if any of us are actually the bottom. I mean, I'm by far not a 1%er, for instance, if that's one kind of cap also about thing. But I mean, the fact that we're on Zoom with an internet connection belies a lot, right? It also doesn't explain or make us all one homogenous group of people. But I think in terms of like extensive precarities and our what we are able to network into, what we actually have the potential of leveraging already in each of our cases is beyond the individual already. Not so for everyone. But I think that also exists too, just not on the terms that it's described or currently existing, is one way I think I would answer that question.
I would like to follow up to your comment and to Pablo. kind of provocation, bottom up, up down. I think that we are behind dichotomies. We have to stop things in terms of it's bottom up, it's up, top down, it's inside, it's outside. The story has been designed, and the strategies of power has been kind of put in place through strategies of tracing, or mapping, on conquering. That happened since the Silk Road, the Slave Road. I mean, there's always been this way of tracing the world to possess, but also to know, and through doing so, to better understand. And I think that our processing of that we are today are operating through of mapping and tracing are helping us in understanding, in making those things part of our experience, part of our biography, and understanding there are anthropological repercussions of those discoveries and of those processes. And they are in some way also part of a narrative that is at the same time individual and collective. It is at the same time local and global. And we have to understand the power of that. And in some way, unlike our predecessors that were using those strategies to create power that was then kept in few hands, we have to understand that power, and is the power of understanding places, knowing things, and sharing that knowledge, is now a power that belongs to everyone. And that's why we are here, and in some way, because believe in that and believe that we can change those strategies of occupation using our brain and our capability of understanding and feeling with, right? I don't want to say compassion, but feeling with other people. And I think that the project that you show, the images that you show are in that direction of wanted to feel with people that are different in situations that are different from ours, in contexts that are different from ours, to be able to be part of those and operate more sensitively in those contexts, more than top down and up down, or up bottom up. It's more about being aware of what are the stories and how can I understand and be part of the story because I know it and because I share it. And that's crucial. So now is what do we do to change the direction then? I mean, what do we do at this point to be active? And I think each one of you is showing what can be done. And there is not a right or wrong, but there are different scales or different angles that you are tackling the issues, and each one equally important, and is even stronger if understood in the network with the other approaches. So if all your approaches and all your specific field of expertise and your proactive actions are coordinated and understood coordinatively. And I think that's the advantage that we have today, to be able to see the connection among those things and not to see sectors and partialize the version of this kind of several truths that we are living through. Sorry for my confusing, but it's very stimulating what you have been saying, and from Deleuze to the Argentinian mapping, it's incredible. So I thank you for all of you for sharing that with us. And I hope that students and our students are also listening to this conversations.
No, I just wanted to address what you said, Pablo, is about that you feel there is a lack of coordination from the bottom up. I don't feel that, because the example of Chile is very interesting, so in the way that we need to deal with uncertainty, and also with the capability of making systems between different dimensions. That is also a challenge that technology imposes on us, because there are many, in fact, what is going on right now is that there is a big convergence of technologies, and the coordination is a problem in itself, and probably you were addressing of more like what happened in the last years, that there was a response against that to say, okay, so we can go and cut logistics, we can create havoc in certain localities, and all of these direct actions that was promoted by many people, especially in Europe, but I think there are another way of doing systems that can coordinate actions in different levels, but they are not we need to work on them. But I think that there is a potentiality that we should discover in how systems that make connection with other systems, you know. So, and many systems already were born through this way, you know. So all of the wiki movement that in fact are very much related to architecture, you know. So if we go to the story of Christopher Alexander and the pattern language, and that was taken in the 90s by Ward Cunningham and create the wiki protocol. So that you can see that, and then it came Wikipedia and all of that, you know. So, but that was a story about something that it was very much related to architecture. That's funny, you know, Christopher Alexander and the pattern language, that suddenly became a protocol that made system in a global way, you know, so using the technology of open source architectures for computers and all of that. But there's an example there, you know, so, and there are many others, you know, so that probably we need to frame them in their own time, you know, so how they have been evolving, but
I think that one of the critical things that you mentioned is that while you were doing a cartography or a mapping, you were criticizing the same systems that mapping was activating. That to me is the essence here, that for instance, Christopher Alexander today will not apply anymore because we understand the problems of the simplicity of the tree-like and the trying to bypass the tree-like, you know, that we have neural networks running and so on. So I think that what you mentioned about multidimensionality is a little bit the key. That
I know.
Yeah,
I know, but that story happened, you know. So I know, but that story happened. So there are many more to come. I don't know how.
I thought that it was interesting your presentation that you were providing the criticism of the fact that you cannot homogenize, and that is both site-specific, problem-specific, but at the same time, the instrument of representation at a certain point becomes the limitation. And I think that that's the most difficult thing to understand, that even if we are coordinated and we develop a system of coordination, that then becomes what you mentioned about the technological, technological determinism of the media that end up producing other problems, right? I think that we are at that moment today in which we are aware of the problems that creates our own solutions, and that's why philosophers are saying it's more important to raise the right question than to actually provide a solution, because all the solutions we have done so far are going to end up consuming their own systems of representation. So that was to me the one of the things that I think that you were very precise in the articulation of the relation between the social and the territory. And what you're saying about Chile, that happened, but it may not happen, or it may never happen, right? So happen, great, but it may never happen if, for instance, what Hana was saying, at the level of the law, right, you're getting dropped all these things, and there's no possibility of action going against that grain, right?
It's exactly the same thing that you say with the recycling. It's like all these buildings, you can't recover them, but can you put the energy on them? It's like, no, the answer is not. It's the same. Can you spend your whole day picking up plastic bags from the ocean? It's like, no, it's like, it is impossible, you know. It's like, in a way, but it doesn't matter because you are writing history. It's like, you can do it with one, with two, or with three, but still you are writing history, and the history will rewrite it by itself after. So you hopefully don't have to do it. I mean, that's the hope. that you know, you don't have to keep fighting for it. You don't have to pick up the bags. You don't have to fight for the buildings. You don't have to, you know, break any pipes anymore. It's like, you know, it's like the history will talk by itself. I mean, and that will be for me my desire. That is not really the government talking, but history talking. I mean, that's my hope. I don't believe that, we have a problem between the institution and the individual here. And I think the problem is coming from not giving any arguments anymore. I mean, there is no, and we're talking about representation. So the question is, for me, representation is reduced to affirmation. This is what it is because I say so. But in the moment that history is just saying no to that, and I think that's the only battle that we can win as intellectuals, probably, right? So we are negating not reality, we are fighting history, I will say. We may not be able to have the strength to fight reality, but for sure we can fight history.
Yeah,
that's the way I see it.
I totally agree, and in a way it relates to what Giovanni, you were talking about. I think that you're tangentially referring to colonialism, right, as a means of inscribing history and the kind of post-colonial processes.
And we are still there, Pablo, unfortunately.
Exactly.
We are still, the different kind of colonialism is like financial, it's not territorial anymore, because we consumed all the territory. So we are still there, unfortunately. I don't see a post yet, and I wish we can build a post. And I truly believe that Hana was saying, changing, I mean, not fighting history, but morphing history, I think will be the best goal that we can have through our work, right? So that goes in different directions.
Yeah.
All right, it's getting late. We ran over the time set up by the structure, by the limiting structure of our of our lecturing series. But I just wanted to thank you so much for not only sharing your time but actually for the impressive work that you're doing at many levels. So I really want to thank you. I am kind of proud to be your friend. And to see how you are advancing and the questions that you're raising for our discipline. So thank you so much. I don't know, don't say if you want to close.
I just want to say that, I think, this is a long conversation we had today, but I would say this is just another start for all of us to have another sort of conversation to be continued. So I really appreciate all the presentations today and really learned a lot from all of you. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you
so much.
It was super
Same,
nice.
Thank you. Hopefully we'll have
Nice
another
to meet you all.
Thank you very much.
Yeah,
Nice to
exactly.
meet you.
We will, well, you're all connected, so
Yes,
we'll
perfect.
be in touch.
We'll do it again.